Imagine a crowd, like, throwing this massive ecstatic parade for a hero. They're literally paving the streets for him. And then, I mean, just imagine that exact same crowd fiercely demanding his public execution.
And all of that happens in just 5 days.
Right, 5 days. Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're cutting through the familiar religious text to look at the historical, political, and psychological powder keg of first century Judea during Jesus' entry into Jerusalem.
Yeah, our mission here is really to figure out how a massive disconnect between expectation and reality can engineer just an absolute tragedy. It really is a masterclass in crowd psychology.
It really is. I mean, to understand this whiplash, we have to look at the atmosphere of Jerusalem during Passover.
That's exactly. You have this city with a normal population of around maybe 50,000 people suddenly swelling to upwards of 500,000.
Wow, that is a huge jump.
Oh yeah, it is packed, it is claustrophobic, and the air is just thick with nationalistic fervor.
Right, the tension is palpable. And right into the middle of this mob rides Jesus, but he's on a donkey. Which is, it's a fascinating visual.
It totally is.
It's like a besieged city eagerly awaiting a 5-star general to roll in with an armored division to break the enemy lines. But instead, an ambassador quietly rides in, holding a peace treaty.
That's a great analogy. The crowd and the man at the center of the parade have entirely opposite agendas. The people are cheering for a political revolutionary to violently overthrow Rome.
But he is arriving as a peaceful, suffering servant.
Exactly. And that mismatch is where we find a core theme in our source, which is this tragic concept of not knowing. The crowd is jubilant, actively projecting all their desperate hopes for a military conqueror onto him.
But in the middle of this deafening applause, Jesus actually weeps, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He isn't swept up in the moment because he knows the devastating endgame that their blinding desire for violent political rebellion is going to bring.
But wait, looking at the historical timeline, the total destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans happened in 70 AD. That's almost 4 decades after this parade.
Right, 40 years later.
So it's hard to blame the crowd's manic panic in that specific 5-day window on an event that hadn't happened yet. What were they feeling right then in that moment that drove them to the edge?
Well, that is the crucial context. The doom hadn't happened yet, but the fuse was already lit. You have to look at the severe political grievances of that exact moment.
Like what?
Well, Roman officials were blatantly stealing sacred gold from the temple to pay off taxes. And on top of that, they were disrupting the traditional high priest lineage.
Basically installing puppet leaders who would do Rome's bidding.
Precisely. So they are dealing with heavy systemic oppression and massive cultural humiliation on a daily basis. And this oppression was actively fueling violent revolutionary groups like the Zealots.
Which explains why Jesus was weeping.
Right. He saw the inevitable trajectory of this militant mindset. He knew it would culminate in 70 AD, when Roman General Titus and 60,000 troops would completely crush the Jewish uprising.
And they literally dismantled the massive Second Temple, right? Like prying it apart stone by stone, searching for hidden gold.
Yes, leaving nothing behind but what we now know as the Wailing Wall, and the fallout continued until 73 AD at the Siege of Masada.
Right, where 1,000 Jews ultimately chose mass suicide over surrendering to Roman forces. It's incredibly bleak.
It really is.
Okay, so knowing that this is the geopolitical reality, a total powder keg, let's bring it back to our 5-day window. Jesus makes it clear he is not going to be the military leader who fights Rome.
Right, which means it makes sense that the public's mood would sour.
Sure, but disappointment doesn't naturally equal a death sentence. How does a crowd turn aggressive enough to demand an execution that fast?
Because it wasn't organic at all. Enter the religious elites, specifically a 71-member council. They were terrified of Jesus' growing influence.
Why? Because it directly threatened their very delicate, highly precarious power-sharing arrangement with the Roman government.
Exactly. If Jesus inadvertently sparked a riot, Rome would strip the council of whatever small amount of power they had left.
So they essentially ran a first-century smear campaign.
Yeah, pretty much.
They took the crowd's massive cognitive dissonance, this realization of, wait, this guy isn't going to overthrow Rome like we wanted, and they weaponized it.
That is precisely how it worked. They actively directed that disappointment, convincing the public that Jesus wasn't just a letdown, but a blasphemous fraud who was putting their entire nation at risk.
Wow. They wanted a conqueror on a war horse, and they got a teacher on a donkey.
Right, and when he refused to fit their mold, The council easily manipulated the crowd's fractured expectations. They turned adoration into lethal hatred just to maintain their own political survival.
Which is the ultimate tragedy of mismatched expectations. A crowd projected their intense political desires onto a spiritual mission, completely missing the reality of what was sitting right in front of them.
It really highlights how dangerous it can be when we only see what we want to see.
Absolutely. And it leaves you with a pretty heavy question to mull over long after we wrap up today. Think back to that crowd going from a parade to an execution in 5 days.
Yeah, it makes you think.
It does. How often do you turn against leaders, ideas, or even friends today simply because they refuse to play the exact role you secretly assigned to them in your own mind?
Right.